So this is Matt from Loke BattleMats. We've got, I think, about an hour and a half to do a live dungeon draw. I'll quickly introduce ourselves and then get straight onto the drawing, I think. So we're Loke BattleMats. We produce primarily books full of battle mats, which you open up and then use them on your table. We also do digital versions of the same maps and lots of extra maps. We've also got Tam, who's on the chat section here, and let's get straight on with the map, I think. So I've pre-prepped a map with all the layers and things I'm going to want to use. So let me just open that up. So the tool I'm going to be using is Photoshop. I tend to use Photoshop for all of my map drawing. Although any other graphics program, as long as it's got layers, should be able to do similar. And there's obviously nothing wrong with doing your battle maps, with pen and paper. So this one here, what I tend to do is start with a sketch layer. And one of the first things to do, because we're going to be doing a battle map, so a tactical sort of sized map, we're going to use a standard 5 foot to a single square grid size. So the thing I'm going to do first is use a Photoshop guides setting. So I'm just going to go up here to view and do a new guide layout. So the canvas I've got here is sized for 36 inches wide by 24 inches high. We're doing this one in 30 dpi, mainly because we usually draw for print media. So we go for print style resolution and then just shrink that down when it comes to the virtual versions. So let me just put a plain layer on here so you can see that grid, or I'll just activate this base layer I've got here. So putting this grid on will give me all these nice grid lines so that I can see where all the 1 inch blocks are. And I'm going to lock those guides so I don't accidentally start moving them around and misaligning things. So I've got a sketch layer here. Oh, one thing I can quickly show is this is the map we produced for the last one of these streams. This was during Gen Con Online, as every convention has gone online this year. We're going to aim for, obviously not the same layout or anything, but a similar style of floor, wall, and the like. And the map that we do on here, we'll put up on our DriveThru. So DriveThruRPG, where this one from Gen Con is also available for free as well. So let's start with a sketch layer. So this is going to be a very, very rough sketch. This particular map, I've prepped a few layers. So layers with patterns and the like for me to do some lava, some sort of chasm, sort of rocky edges around that lava, some flagstones and some walls. So let's start to just quickly work out where some of the chasms in the lava might be, and then we'll start filling in other details. So for this particular one, I'm thinking this might be a smallish dungeon, so maybe a boss layer, whether that be like a dragon or a demon or something, or whether it's a, what was once a dwarven hall a la Moria, but now has, some serious structural problems and some monster infestations. So let's do some idea of where we might do the lava cracks. And none of this is going to be particularly precise or neat. This is just blocking out where we might put some elements. So let's have a nice big scar of lava down the middle. And maybe have that be 2 branches. I'm going to leave it nice and wide in places just so it's nice and difficult for players to move around on. And maybe stick, a jumping point in the middle there. So that's going to be our main lava piece. Let's maybe light up another edge with something else over here. should probably do us. So what I'm going to do now is decide where the actual dungeon halls and floors and the like are going to be here. So we've only got 24 by 36 to work with here, and that's mainly so it fits into the time frame we've got. So I'm just going to pick a color here that I'm not going to use for the actual dungeon tiles. Let's just use this pale green. And for this one, there's going to be no exterior, so let's have the dungeon coming in around the halfway sort of point. So I'd maybe make that a set of stairs coming in. Then let's give ourselves some sort of entrance hall. Just cutting in at the side to where the lava is there. So this is just marking out with the marquee selection tool set to square, and then just filling in with a normal paint bucket. So I would assume that, yeah, this would have carried on into a much bigger chamber. So let's have another bit of corridor there. And let's make sure that extends right up and goes into what will be our big lava-filled main room. So let's make sure we've got some options for people to move around. One thing to always make sure with the battle maps is that they work for encounters. So you want to have multiple paths, different heights and elevations and the like. Let's make this a decent sized room up here. Something else I tend to try and do is make sure that corridors stay a good sort of 10 foot across. So if you're using D&D for a good example, you've got space for larger monsters to move around, and you've got space for your smaller monsters or your adventuring party to move around each other in corridors and not get all tied up with each other. So let's pop another room down here as well, maybe keep that fairly symmetrical with the other one. And have that tie into our main room as well. Which isn't looking symmetrical at the minute. Oh, that's right, it's because I've taken it to the top of that one. So let's just quickly undo that box and take that one to there. So obviously these won't stay as green rooms at the end. So over here, I'm thinking a couple of side rooms and to make this main room have a bit more of an interesting shape at the end of it. So let's make sure we go to the very back. Right, so I'm going to try and make sure that shape goes to the middle. Which means it's going to have to be a tiny bit bigger just to fit the number of spaces we've got. So I'm just going to chop this in half and move some of it down so that I can keep that symmetry in that room. I was going to do a quick transform to neaten the gap between those two. So let's just put some little chambers at the back here, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. So it might already be being discussed in the chat, but how are people finding the switch to virtual for the expo this year? Obviously, we would normally be standing around in the NEC about now. Okay, so I've got the rough layout I want for the room. I might make this middle section a tiny bit bigger just so those corridors don't butt right at the ends. So let's just increase this a little bit. And this is basically just a template. So a nice, super simple look at what the layout might be. I've noticed that I've got, oops, that's the wrong one. Let's get that tool. Slightly wider corridor than I might have planned there. So let's take that down to the same size. So at this stage, I can stop, take a look at the map and see if it's going to work for the encounters. So just checking some of the comments. Yeah, so most of the maps we produce as products are in some form of wipe clean format. Obviously for the digital ones, they're digital, you can draw on a layer above them. Okay, so I've got a rough idea of where things are. I'm going to take from this stone block out, I'm just going to chop out the section where I'm going to have the various bits of lava. One thing I need to do here is just turn off snap on my guides, otherwise all my lines are going to be very square and blocky. Right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that out of the stone block out layer, and I'm also going to take it out of this base layer here. What I'll do now, I've got a layer hiding under here which has some lava effects on it. So if I take out from this base layer, which is just a grainy sort of medium sort of color layer, so this one's useful for transitioning to sort of like cavern floors or the grout layer between flagstones. Let's get back to this one and finish taking these bits that we're going to have as lava out. So this is just using a freehand selection tool. And again, at this stage, these lines don't need to be super precise because we're going to go back over and do things neatly in a little while. Right, so with that selected, it's not got that little island which I quite want, so I'm going to invert the selection and then just add this little middle bit in and then invert it again so that I end up with that piece removed from the selection. So that bit of green should stay, and we'll do the same on the base layer there. So that's roughly where our bits of lava are going to be, and where the green is where the dungeon flagstone floor and the like is going to be. All right, so let's start with the dungeon floor, I think, next. So I've got my various layers prepped up for this. So I'm going to take this prepped layer we've got here and just make sure I've got each of the bits of green selected. And then we can hide this one for a minute. Go down to this flagstone pattern layer. So this has a pattern overlay on it, and that pattern overlay is some flagstones I've already drawn to a 1-inch scale. So when I fill in this layer, it should fill in with the flagstone pattern. I'm going to make this a much more distinct color, I think. Right, let me just check my effects there, because I don't want the green showing through onto the actual flagstone. So I'm just going to check the amount of fill I've got on the pattern layer. Yeah, so it's not all the way up. So let's adjust that all the way. And then if I rasterize that style, it'll change that from a pattern layer to an actual bit of an image that I can edit. And then what we want to do is get rid of all these green lines, so we're left with just the drawing of where the actual dungeon blocks are going to be. So I want to do a color select and get this green. Once I've got that, I want to get rid of that green. So in theory now we should just have the flagstone colors. While they're at that nice flat basic sort of level, I'm going to put the walls in and then work from there. So again, I've got a layer here. So this one has a set of different layer effects in it. So a beveling, let me draw a tiny section of wall and then talk about what effects are on it. So a mediumish grey is probably a good colour to go with. And for this, I'm just going to use a standard pencil set to about the width I want the walls to be. So let's zoom in a little bit. So as this is for virtual tabletop, I'm going to try and make sure all the walls are outside of the full squares of the dungeon itself, so you get the full area to work with on the map. So this layer here, the effect on it, there's a bevel and emboss which has a texture on it to give it sort of this rough stony look. A pattern overlay to change that pattern a bit more and just make it a bit more different as we go through different layers. And the outer glow and drop shadow gives it this sort of like hazy effect around the outside. And the drop shadow means that that's slightly more intense on the bottom right. I tend to do light sources coming from top left. So I'm just going to put this back to full size and then just go around and use shift draw so it'll complete the line to my mouse cursor each time and just fill in where the wall's going to be. A later stage of this would be to go through and cut this into chunks and then to make those chunks look a little bit less regular and even. So as an example on the last map we did, so all of this is taking slices out of that wall layer and then moving some of those bricks around so that they look less regular and a bit more dungeony. But for this one, we just need to get the walls into place. And some of those walls are going to be a bit damaged by that lava. In fact, I can take the sketch layer off now. I've noticed that's left me with some of the green underneath the sketch layer, but that's fine. We'll get rid of that when we come to do the flagstones in a bit more detail in a moment. So hopefully I've not made too many corridors to make this take too long, but let's just go through and get the walls set up. Then we'll pattern the flagstones and then start patterning the edges of where it cuts into the lava and trying to make it look a bit more derelict. So it's very important not to have snap on at this point, otherwise all the lines would be just following the guides. Would look very, very uniform, and they would also cut over into the flagstone tiles, which is something I don't really want them to do. So one of the nice things when drawing these sort of maps is you do start to think about the encounters and things you might be having on them. I mean, ideally, if you're drawing for a particular encounter, you'd know the encounter first, but if you're drawing a map, for the sake of drawing one, or to have, like a more generic usable battlefield, or just to help you come up with an encounter, it's nice to sort of think what might happen around the place. So here, the obvious problem is the lava. And, we might add some more blocks and rocks and things, have a look at, like your party's composition. Are they able to jump those gaps? If they're not, you might be generous and put some blocks in for them to sort of jump over. A bit of a ruined bridge, something like that. And, you might want some enemies with ranged weapons, maybe put some cover, some rubble on some of these sides, so there's places for people to snipe at the party as they're trying to negotiate the lava, depending on just how evil you're feeling as a DM, or how much of a challenge you're making for your players, I suppose I should say. All right, we're almost there on the walls. I find it's always worth doing these before doing the flagstones, because you'll find that some of the flagstones are underneath the walls and you might not necessarily need to worry too much about them. So for the minute, I'm just going to hide the walls and go back to our lava layer and get rid of the rest of that green. That should have selected it and removed it. Right, so I'm just going to quickly do is desaturate that layer just so there's no extra colours coming through. Right, so I'm now going to put that onto a layer which has the first of the dungeon floor effects on it. Let's put the walls back on. So this first layer, it's a bevel and emboss. Let's zoom in on one of the tiles to have a look. Next one. Yeah, so there's a bevel and emboss there to make it look like they're standing up. An outer glow and a drop shadow so that they darken the area around them and look like they're raised. I tend to have a couple of different layers that I put on the flagstones. So the next one I'm going to do is a texture layer. This is just to make them all a slight bit different again. So for this one, the easiest thing to do is for me to go to the layer with all the flagstones on, which is this one. Invert that selection so I've selected all the actual blocks. Go to my texture layer, and this one should be a averagey sort of grey. Give it the right sort of colour, and then just fill that. And if we zoom in to have a look at that, so this one's just a pattern overlay effect. So this one, I think it's actually a picture of some stones and pebbles, but the pattern is down as the inverse, so it ends up giving it dark spots and light spots to give a bit of variation to the stonework. I have another layer which gives it some more twist and variation. So this is just a picture of some marble, and I want this to only affect the stone, so I'll cut the rest of that image out so it just leaves the effect on those. And then there's a lighter marble effect as well, and we'll do the same, take that away from where we don't have stones. Right, the next thing we want to do is our void fill. So let's make this look more like chunks of rock than just grey and brown. So if I select our green masked area again, try and make sure I get everything. I've just noticed I probably want some walls and some stones back on this bit here. So I'll repair that in just in fact, actually I'll repair that now. So I'm going to have to do a new layer just to get my texture layer back. So this is from missing a selection earlier where this would have been an extra bit of room. So if I just fill that with a colour we're not using, I'm going to put my flagstone texture layer onto here just so I get some flagstones. And then cut the green away after rasterizing the layer. Which, if it's all connected, I can probably just do it for one select. Mostly. Right, so this we want to put down with our floor texture. And then add the extra texture layers in as well. As we go through this, I'll probably play with some of these colors and things a bit more as well. So I'm not too worried about them being precise matches just at this point. And that should be near enough for now. Right, let me just put the walls back on for there. I'm just going to sample that one just so I get the exact same wall color. Normally I'd try and save a either set a swatch for a map or just have a layer of a couple of the colors I've used so I know which ones are there. But we're trying to be a bit quick on this one and hopefully not make too many mistakes like forgetting to put those flagstones in. Right, so that gives us another room with the lava cutting across it. So that's going to be handy for, you know, maybe there's an inviting looking chest or something over that side. And they'll have fun and games for characters to pop over and see if they can get to it or not. And, you know, there's always a chance for mimic, and that seems like a very good spot for one. So I'm just going to get rid of those edge tiles there. Right, that's most of the flagstone work done, or at least the initial bits. The monitor is effectively pretty much a telly. I think this is a 55 or 60 inch. I tend to draw one-to-one size for the books and the maps we do. So yeah, 4K, big. I used to draw them on a smaller monitor, but it's made such a difference doing them life size. So yeah, I remember what I was doing. So what I've got here is another layer. This one's got effectively a cracked pattern on it. And this will just make the flagstones look a bit more dented and damaged. So I'm going to do this on a less than 100% opacity brush and focus kind of on the areas where the flagstones would probably be damaged. And it'll just put some cracked lines in there. So definitely wherever the sort of the lava intersects, and a couple of other patches just to break up the evenness and the like. One thing to always try and avoid when drawing these sort of things is unintentional repeating patterns, because your eye is very good at spotting them even if you don't realize you're spotting them. At some point I'll go through and chop up these stones so they're not quite so neatly broken up on the lava as well. But as I know we're on a bit of a timer, let's try and get through each main stage I've got planned and then possibly go through and neaten up and change some bits if we get time near the end. Regardless, even if we don't finish the map 100% during the stream, what I'll do is finish it up after and then pop it up on DriveThru as a free title. We'll have the link for that on all of our social media. Right, so let's add some cracks and things to a bunch of the flagstones. Right, the next thing I think is going to be the void fill. So this is just to make the empty areas here look more like stonework than they currently do. So for this, best one is to select all this green we've got up here, because this is a nice block out. And the void fill, I just need something close to black. So I invert the selection from the early template we made. I'll fill this in, though it's going to go over the lava. I'm just going to have to cut those bits out. But luckily we've got those on this layer. Right, what I might do at this point is turn off the guides, because we can see mainly where the squares are going to be with the flagstones. If I need them to measure anything, I can re-enable them. So let's put some bits around the edge of this lava next. So I've got a couple of layers set up for the chasm edges. And first things first is going to be a relatively medium-ish grey to sort of bridge between these edges here. So this is essentially the same pattern layer that the void fill's got, so that it should sort of merge one into the other. And I'm just going to go down the edges of where this chasm is, just with this grey first. And then we're going to do the inner edge of the chasm with a colour that should blend it with the lava a bit more. Of course, there's the option for monsters that live in lava, just to make any jumps or climbs or attempts to move over it that little bit more exciting. Or you could always assume that this is quite a high chambered room, have some flying creatures. Or if the PCs are lucky, maybe even flying PCs. Just make sure that merges into the fill at the back. What I might do is darken some of those areas so it's obvious which bits are on the map and which are the dead space. So that brush is probably a bit big for there, so I might just take some of that down by using a razor, just so the lava can creep towards that room a bit more. Alright, so before I put the next bit of the embankment colour in, I'm just going to go to my lava layer, because I've got a highlight running all across it at the minute, which I'm going to take off nearer the edges, just so there are some bits that are brighter than others, and to make it a bit more varied and interesting a pattern. And try and leave like the brighter hot spots in a couple of places, but not everywhere. So all of these pre-prep layers are something I've done particularly for these streams, just because we're drawing them quite quickly. A map this sort of size completely from scratch without having any of these things prepped is probably a good 4 or 5 times the amount of time, if not longer, depending on the level of detail that goes in. And these lava layers, there are actually 2 lava layers here. So one of them's got more of a superheated sort of rock style texture to it. So I'm deleting off some of the upper lava layer to show the details of the one below. And as these are pattern layers, there is some repeat to the pattern, so I don't want them completely filling in. I want to judge by eye where I want, one to cut across, one to merge in and the like, just so it all looks a bit more varied. I've noticed I didn't put any rocks around that block in the middle, so I'll have to rectify that in a moment. Okay, so I'm reasonably happy with that lava for the minute. So let's go back to these sort of chasm edges, make sure that there's some around the one in the middle. And be generous and maybe connect it to that one so they could climb across. Right, so next I'm going to pick one of the lava style colours, maybe a slightly brighter orange. And on the same texture, same layer, with a smaller brush, I want to make some of these look like they're sort of a bit more glowing hot near the lava, which I think I want to make that slightly redder. So I'm just going to fairly quickly go down and do these, just being aware we're about halfway through. That should, because it's got a limited opacity on it, it's going on top of the other one, give us a bit of a grade between the hot rocks down near the molten stuff and what should be cooler rocks up near the top. Let's just make sure it looks a bit hotter between those. Again, while I'm doing this, I'm varying the brush size every so often, just so that they're hopefully not looking too uniform. Let's give this a tail heading off into the lava at the bottom here. Okay, it's starting to look quite nice in the middle there. I'm going to have to use a much smaller brush for this narrower bit here. Oh, yes, and something we'll I think do this time as well, which we did for the last map we did for Gen Con, is we'll ask for suggestions in the comments as to what to call the map. So if you've got any ideas, then please do comment away. Let me check what these other layers we've got here. I've got a couple more texture layers for making the edges of these interesting. I think what I want to do first is go through and just break up the uniform line at the end of the flagstones. What I'll do is I'll do this room here and see how long that takes. If it takes a while, I might have to finish the rest up if we get time near the end. But I just want to get rid of this super straight line and make it a little bit more jagged. Which I'm going to do with the eraser set to pencil at full opacity, so it's just going to cut the blocks out from this dungeon floor layer. So that looks a bit straight at the edge. So where we've got some of the cracked pattern layer, I'm going to follow that in some places as well to give it the right sort of shapes. And there's still some layers on top of this, so it won't look fully cut out until I then go to those layers and chop off from them. What I could do to make it a little bit more obvious is turn off the all the layers that are adjusting the flagstones. And when that catches up, it'll be down to just the base layer, so we can see what we're cutting and chopping. So this will just get rid of that smooth line from where I just chopped them out from the lava shape earlier. We'll try and further mess up and rubbleize these edges in another step. Try and get rid of shapes that don't look quite so natural in the rock. Try and make it look a bit more sheared and the like. Yeah, so this is fairly time consuming, so I'm going to do just this chasm here like this, and if I get time I'll tidy up the main one on the stream. If not, I'll do that post stream before posting up onto DriveThru. Try and select just that one. There we go. Because the resolution we tend to work these files in, they do get a bit big, especially when all the layers and things are in place. So I've noticed it's starting to slow down a little bit. Well, they're all looking a bit too uniform for my liking. I'm just going to get rid of some of the edge there. Let's just put some larger cracks in the stones behind, just to kind of blend the breakup of those into the chasm area. Try and make these look like they join and it was a bit of the same break maybe. Okay, that'll do for that one for the minute. Try and be a little bit quicker on this side. So as this particular dungeon doesn't have an obvious exterior entrance, it's just got the corridor kind of leading off from the edge. This is probably going to be part of a larger complex maybe. So whether this is the end boss room, or like a more puzzle or skill challenge type area, with all the potential jumps and things. as I've not put another exit out of it, it's either going to be a dead end or, final room. And you'd expect with the lava and such that it's probably fairly deep down in a dungeon. Unless someone's dungeon is particularly unlucky and it's got lava filled at the very top, but anything's possible. All right, let's just speed these up a little bit. It's always these small details that tend to take all the time. So as a good example of what you can do, this is the sort of neatening of those up that I would normally do on these sort of maps, and I'll get around and finish these off at the end. Otherwise it's going to take the rest of the stream just cutting up these rocks, especially on that large chasm. And when we zoom out, it'll probably be very difficult to tell the difference. All right, so let me turn on the layers above. What I'm going to do for that one is just select outside the stones. So this will select all the bits I've just cut out and just remove them just by delete from each of the layers above. So they kind of fit in with the rest. All right, so I've got a couple more textured layers to try and help merge in the tops of the chasm type areas. So this one is smaller pebbles. And this again is kind of one of the ones very difficult to see unless I zoom right in. So this is adding these little extra sort of like different shaped blocks to here, which are fairly subtle. But it just helps break up the uniform texture that's been used underneath. So what I'll commonly do is use multiple textures laid on top of each other so that you can cover up any repeats in pattern from a lower texture by putting another texture over any spots where you kind of see the pattern sort of re-emerging again. You can see it didn't quite merge smoothly into those lines there, so this one will just let me pick up extra bit of texture on top of those lines so that I can make it look a bit smoother. So I'm just going to go to a full screen and a slightly bigger brush just to put a bit more of that in on the main chasm. Although I will come back later and make sure all these flagstones get a bit more of a messing up around the edges, so they start to look a bit more like this cracked edge over here where we spend a bit more time on. And I've got another cracked texture here that will go and do similar again. So all this is about is making sure the patterns that I've used don't look repetitive, look more interesting for having variations and the like, and merge into the layers above or below them a bit nicer. Right, so this one here is a rubble texture. So this is one to go over right near the edges of the flagstones, and it will create big blocks of rubble like that. I'm going to make that slightly lighter. And be a bit more selective where I pop those. So a lot of these texture layers are set so that they'll show slight amounts of what's below them, so some of the colours will leach through and things. So let's put this in a couple of places just to show where rocks may have fallen down. Seems to be particularly relevant around where the walls and things might be. Just keeping a close eye on the time to see if I can get to do as many little steps as I'm hoping in the drawing. I think the more treacherous these edges will look, the better it would be for sort of having a party try and jump across that middle bit there. And some of this rubbling's helping cover up some of that particularly smooth cutting of the cobblestones as well. To make that pop a little bit, I tend to go and make sure the line underneath, with the layer underneath it, is a little bit darker. So I use a burn tool and just go and darken up some of the chasm edges where the rubble sits. Right, so next thing to do is going to be some lights. We'll do some lights and some shadow. So let's have a quick look. Let's do some fairly generic light in some of these rooms. So this is a divide layer where I put a gradient overlay onto it. So let's get a blue, a radial gradient, and that'll give us some light in a room. On that particular one, I'm going to change the colour of that one a little bit. That sort of colour is going to work well for the lava, but over here, let's make it a little bit more neutral. And I'm just going to change the brightness on that. As it's a divide layer, I've kind of got to go the opposite way. I'm going to increase the brightness to make it less bright in the room. And what I tend to do for these lights as well is cut them so they don't affect outside the flagstones. So if I take that off, all the grouting things will remain nice and dark, but there's a bright spot in the light of the room. So the more I'm looking at the map now, so it's definitely looking more sort of boss encounter to me. Possibly with like a trap distraction down in this bottom left, well, or a tempting looking chest, which is a prime mimic material, and then maybe some treasure rooms or space for minions at the side here. And yeah, something that can fly or doesn't really care about the lava, I think is something you want here, so that the boss monster isn't particularly affected by it, but it gives the PCs well, things to tactically work around and to try and chase around that boss as it's trying to move around and heal, or call more minions forth. I mean, maybe it's calling stuff out of the lava. Right, let's draw some more lights on. Just going to do minor light effects in each of these little rooms and then work on the big room. Let's just mix some of these in and then do the colour change to them en masse. So this is really just to give the flagstones a bit of colour variation from the lighting. All right, let's colour these. Yeah, so make that fairly subtle. And again, I'm going to go to the dungeon floor layer and just select outside the flagstones and then take that off of the light layer. So all the lines between the flagstones stay nice and dark and don't get affected by the light. Right, for this big room, and it's a little partner over here, I think I'm going to start with using a gradient fill, but I'll probably then take a brush to make sure the lava kind of glows in the areas where it should do. So let's take that from there. That's giving me the right sort of glow, so I'm just going to make sure I get that colour. And I want to decrease that over bits of the lava, but make sure it glows around the edges. So I'm going to start with this one over here first. And this is going to be a brush, a soft brush with fairly low opacity. I'll try and light up the areas. To show all the lava glow that might be coming off. I don't want this everywhere, but I do want to take it off of the grouting lines to a good degree, which I'm going to do more manually on these. So a brush razor, again with the opacity down a bit. This needs to be a bit bigger than cutting up the edge of the flag. So this is just to make sure the grouting lines don't glow. It looks like it's more to sort of like catching the flagstones and the edge of the chasm and things. Right, and I'll do the same in here. I don't want it to necessarily be quite this bright in the middle. So I'm just going to remove some of that effect there. And take it away from those grout lines. It's not caught that one, which is why I'm not getting it. Oops, a bit too much. Let's do that with the eraser again. Let's just try and remove some of these bits where it's gone a little bit too bright and pink near the very edges. Try to get some of that stone colour back. So I kind of want it to be lighting the flagstones up and making the room glow a bit, but not necessarily quite so bright at the very, very edges. Let's look a bit more like how I'd like that. Okay, as far as main bits of lighting go, I think that's good for now. I just want to edit some of these edge bits where they're looking a bit too straight. I think what might be a good addition is either some rubble piles or some pillars just to break up some of this large room area. I think maybe a set of pillars about here. So the easiest way to do this is going to be to go back to our walls, just make the outline shape of them, and then cut out the various flagstones underneath them. Okay, set to about the right size. And let's put them in line with this wall here. So these ones are going to do the inside of the square. And do one in the same spot down here. This time not shift clicking from the original pillar. So a quick look to see if we want pillars anywhere else for altering movement. The other thing these are going to give us is some good interesting shadows, which both can look good on a map, but they'll also help with line of sight, spots to hide, that sort of thing. And this area here is looking very much like it's going to be throne or altar or something similar. What we might do is talk about putting assets down and then sort of blending them into the map in a moment. So what I'll do, I'll put one more here to make it look like there's a full line across the room. Obviously, a fair few of them are now missing because of that lava. And if there were blocks of 3, there would have been one around here. That one's gone now, so we can try and ribble that. Another 3 gets me to there. I'm going to put the grid back in to count this properly. So 1 would have been there, another 3, 1 would be here. And it's partner 1, definitely not visible. So let's clear the guides again. So all we're going to do there is select the inside of each of those pillars. And then just delete off the layers with patterns below them, get to the void fill layer and just fill that in so they look like the rock. Right, let's do shadows, then we'll look to see if we've got time to do assets and things. So all my shadow layer is a standard layer which doesn't have full opacity, and I'll use a brush with soft edges and reduced opacity and draw in where they probably should be. So the lava is going to be the main thing casting this light here, so let's have a nice shadow coming off this pillar over to here. Same on this side here. So if I'm using low opacity, I can build the shadow up to get it how I want to look, and it shouldn't have too many harsh edges. Let's make it nice and shady at the back here. I'll probably just do some shade into some of these other rooms at the back. Just help them pop a little bit as rooms. Do the same on this one. Let's have a bit of shade in this front room. So other things you can do to embellish these sort of maps, the relatively simple sort of dungeon layout ones is different coloured stones and patterns. So yeah, like classic HeroQuest style checkerboards and things is one that I was very keen on. Putting different runes, glyphs or patterns and things onto some tiles, particularly making stuff look a bit more puzzle-like. And then filling it. Assets and things like that. So for doors and things in particular, I tend not to draw doors onto the maps, because either if you're using a physical map or you're using it for virtual tabletop, you're going to want that door open or closed. And if it's in a set position on the map, you've not really got the choice as much. So I tend to either do sort of thresholds to kind of show where a door would be potentially, or leave that to be either a virtual token or a physical asset to put onto a physical map, or just draw a line with a pen to show where the door is and take it off when it's no longer there. Right, so let's see if we can get something onto the end of here. So this we're going to do something with an asset. So I'm just quickly going to a different window to browse what I've got available. So just bear with me 1 second. I think a throne is probably going to be most appropriate. So I think I just happen to have some throne assets, so I'll just find one of those and we can use that. So that's a throne on a bit of a platform. That's a VTT asset, but it's set at the right sort of resolution to use here. So we're going to do a bit of blending and make it look like it fits in this spot here. So let's make it face the right way first. And depending on the type of map you're doing, you might use a lot of assets on that map. So if you're doing a tavern or something, lots of table assets and similar sorts of things. Our most recent Kickstarter was for more town and tavern based things, so got a lot of practice quite recently in doing tavern based tokens. Let's take that to there. Right, we just need to now make this look like it belongs on this map as opposed to just stuck on top. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take that general glow it's got and narrow it down on these sides. I'll leave it at the back. I'm just going to make sure it overlaps the flagstones below it, just because otherwise it'll kind of look like it's floating on them a bit. So looking at that, that looks like about a good sort of 4 or 5 foot wide throne. So that's either going to be someone's standard humanoid with delusions of grandeur and the need for a nice big throne, or it could be something slightly bigger that may have once called this home. So let's manually adjust the shadow layer again underneath it and try and make the token look like it's part of the actual drawing as opposed to something stuck on top. Our machine is definitely starting to struggle a bit here. Let's get rid of some of the invisible layers. We shouldn't need those anymore. Let's try not to do this as subtly with the low opacity, so if I move that up, it should be a bit quicker. I'll try and give it a bit of shape here to make it look like the throne's sticking up a bit. Let's wait for that to finish. Just need a couple of shadows on top of that. So I'm going to do the same here, have that as a not full opacity layer. About 80 should do. And just try and extend some of the shadows that are on the token out and down so that it fits the map a bit better. And we've got lava in front of it, so let's make the shadows at the back a bit bigger. So in theory, giving it shadows that kind of fit this layer a bit better should make it blend a bit more. Although that's looking a tiny bit darker than I'd like, so I'm just going to take that down a bit. Looks like we've got about 10 minutes left. What I might try and quickly do is just show a different way of doing one of those raised dioces. So I'm just going to do a new shadow layer. I'm going to stick with 100% for the minute on the opacity on it. So this one, I'm just going to take a brush. So instead of sticking a token down that's on a raised platform, you can draw a nicer raised platform in using the existing flagstones. So what I'll do is put where the shadows are going to be for it. This is a technique I tend to use for things like stairs as well. And this one, because these are at the front, they're probably not going to be as bright. Although I don't want to take them down that much. Right, then what I'll do is go to the dungeon floor below it, and then select out elements that wouldn't be in shadow because they're on a raised level. Select all of those, and then if I go back to the shadow layer I made for it and take those off, that should give it a nice neat look of raised stones. And in theory, you can then neaten the edge bits and give it a bit more detail as and where it's needed. So running into the last little section, I'll just quickly show what I was talking about earlier with the walls. I'll just do one section. So let's make a nice thin marquee selection and just use that to cut off some brick shapes. I'm just going to take the roundness off of the edge of that as well. Because I don't necessarily want the rounded corners. It's not 100% level, so that'll do. Right. And then what I tend to do is shuffle some of these around. So the wall doesn't look all straight and perfectly neat. Although that's pretty time consuming to do for all of the wall sections we've got there. So that's just a quick example of what would be done for that. Yeah, so I mean, I've not been able to keep an eye on the comments so much, but were there some name suggestions and the like? Oh, I'm seeing one there, Throne of the Fire King, which seems like it'll work nicely. I might take time to do a slightly more Fire Kingy throne after the stream then, than the generic one that I've popped on there as an asset. What I might do is just grab some rubble as an asset and stick that somewhere for the last couple of minutes. Take me a second to get my tokens. So this is taking assets we've already drawn basically and using them just to show what it's like to stick assets on a map. So I'm going to grab this rubble pile, and that needs to be just above the layer where we've got our shadows. Oops, that's if it went to clipboard, which it didn't. Let me try that again. Okay, I've got some rubble. Let's just stick this at the edge of here, so yeah, like where that other pillar might have been. So obviously that's got a generic background texture, which we're not necessarily wanting, so we're going to delete that off. Fairly quickly looking at the time, let me just do a little bit just to show an edge. And then I might just quickly show some of the other stuff we're working on. Yeah, I think my Photoshop session is starting to eat up all the rest of my memory now. We're currently at about 3.5 gig for this map with all the changes and everything on it. So yeah, so this will be a gradual sort of a raising off of the texture at the bottom, so it kind of fits into the map layer it's on. And then I'll do a similar thing to the throne, which is start to add more shadows over the top of it where the light sources might be on this particular map, so they'll kind of come off the back and things here. But Yeah, that's starting to slow down quite a lot now. So what I'll do is I'm going to save this map off as is at the moment, make final edits to it after this stream, and that'll get posted up at some point over the weekend on DriveThruRPG. So things I need to do is cut the stone blocks and make the walls kind of all blocky and wally. Break up these flagstones so they're a bit more natural, like the set here. Tidy up a couple of bits where the light layers aren't quite where I want them to be. Maybe put a new throne in and add some rubble blocks like that, either from assets or draw them fresh in. So let's save this one. And I'm just going to show some of the maps we're working on for our next modular book set, which is still in the early phases, but that'll be a set of wilderness books. So in the same format as the dungeon and the towns and taverns set. Let me just grab those. It might take a moment to load. Let me get them loading. So this next one will be wilderness scenes. So what I'll do is I'll show one that's pretty much complete. Which might take a couple of minutes to load. It's the only problem with keeping all of the layers live and active. It's great for being able to change things. It does eat up resources on the computer. What I can normally do is stop Photoshop, let it just clear all of its scratch disks and things, and then start it again, and it'll go a lot smoother, but I can't do that while I'm streaming from it. So this is from the Wilderness set, which will be kickstarted next year, early next year. So this is a 4-page spread. So the top 2 maps would be in one book, the bottom 2 would be in the other book, and there'll be common entry-exit style areas. Not that there's so much entry-exit for wilderness, but this one is grass canyons. So lots of like little windy canyon type areas and ambush sort of points. And I think we're getting to time. So I just got to say thank you for everyone for watching, and hope you all enjoy the rest of the Virtual Expo. Thank you very much. Cheers and goodbye.